Hey, Curtis. Hello. Curtis. Christina. So there's two. I see Christina and Curtis. So can anyone hear me? Can anyone hear me?
Well, I'm glad to hear you're doing better. Okay, have a good day.
Marissa, can you hear me? Marissa, you can hear me? Or Christina?
Yes, I can hear you.
I don't know how to work this.
And
Ready?
Marissa, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Right on. So and Christina, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And it looks like Marissa muted her microphone, but Marissa, can you hear me?
I can hear you as well.
Okay, right on. I know it's a little frustrating with audio, but video, it's just my policy to keep we will have video conferences at some point, but right now we're just kind of getting used to Zoom. So I want to just maintain privacy, if that makes sense. Right on. So there's Brittany. So Christina and Marissa, any questions?
No.
Not on my end.
No questions?
Yeah, no questions.
Okay. Any comments? Any?
You do nothing. You do nothing. I mean, you do nothing. I know it's telling them. You do nothing. And I got you.
Do you have any comments about the readings or the assignments or the class? Or would you prefer that I just go right into kind of going over trig, anamorphosis, etc.?
Yeah, if we could get into that stuff, it would be helpful. I don't have any comments or anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah, same here. No comments or questions.
All right. So it pretty much makes sense then. Like
Yeah.
in terms of the overall structure of the course, yeah. Right on. So who or what author would you like to start with? Is my screen, can you see?
I can see it, but it's like really blurry where the words aren't clear.
Yeah, I was going to say the same exact thing.
It looks like hieroglyphs.
Does it really?
Yeah.
No, that makes, okay, let me see.
Mine's clear.
Okay, yeah, it's clear right now, right here on the big dark letters.
Okay. So can you see, Trigg's essay, the psychoanalysis of runes? Can you see this?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I have Zizek. Can you see this?
That
No.
one's completely blurry on my end.
This
Yeah,
one?
mine too.
Okay. So I have 6 participants. Let me see something real fast. Okay. How about now? Do you see? Can you see Zizek's essay now?
You know, it could just be because I'm on my phone because I'm at work. I could pull it up on my laptop. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay, I could see it now.
You can?
Yeah, I think if you like zoom in on the phone, because also I'm at work too.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
if you-
Okay.
If
Right
you
on.
zoom in, you could see it better. Yeah.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, great.
Right on.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi,
Hi. Who is this?
this is Curtis.
Oh, hey, Curtis.
Oh, sorry, I was looking for a mic. I couldn't find
Yeah.
it.
It worked out. So I hear you clearly. So right now I have Brittany, Christina, Curtis, and Marissa, and we're likely from all different 101 sections, but it's okay.
Okay.
So don't worry if any of these names are unrecognizable. It's totally fine. All right. So what author should we begin with?
Zizek.
Zizek. Wonderful. And I don't mind just just kind of reading reading and commenting, but if any of you have started Zizek, what do you think you understand? What's posing problems, etc.? Has anyone started Zizek?
No, not yet.
Okay.
I did a little bit.
And who is that? Who is this?
Marissa.
Marissa, okay. And what was that experience like?
Honestly, I'm going to be completely honest, and I probably will sound stupid about it, but it was kind of difficult for me. I haven't done a lot of reading
Yes.
since I have graduated high school, which was, 8 years ago. So like just a little bit of difficulty understanding it, but going back and rereading was helping me.
Okay, yes, that's wonderful. Yeah, Zizek's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. And don't feel bad. So let me just approach Zizek through various strategies that you can use to engage like difficult reading. So can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
So what you want to
Yeah.
do, like with all readings, and this applies to this class or any other classes you're taking, is you want to highlight like basically all the topic sentences of a reading. So can you just see how I just highlighted this?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what you want to do, like just pre-reading strategies, is to go through an article, highlight all the topic sentences. And the reason why I'm encouraging you to do this is the gist of the reading in terms of like summary are all in the topic sentences.
Nothing. Oh, thank God.
So that would be one strategy to utilize. But if you don't mind, like I can just
Have you
begin
seen my
reading.
professor, my English professor?
It's all good. It's a democracy. Here we go. So if you don't mind, is it cool if I just read Zizek and comment it and ask like for everyone's thoughts or questions? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
All right. So here we go.
And
So
I'll be
we
able to
begin
work.
with Zizek, how nothing can affect anything. So Patricia Highsmith's story, Black House, perfectly exemplifies the way
Is there
fantasy
anybody here? Do
space
you want me to get him?
functions as an empty surface, as a kind of screen for the projection of desires. The fascinating presence of its positive contents does nothing but fill out a certain emptiness. The action takes place in a small American town where men gather in the evenings in the local saloon and revive nostalgic memories, local myths, usually their youthful adventures that are always somehow associated with a desolate old building on a hill near the town. So there's a lot going on in just this opening paragraph. So Zizek is referencing a short story or a story by Patricia Highsmith. And he introduces this Lacanian Freudian term, fantasy space. So this fantasy space is key to understanding the meaning of Zizek's article. So you can think of fantasy space as have you ever been in a classroom wherein the professor has a projector on the screen? Have we experienced this before?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So fantasy space is similar to a projector projecting content on a screen in a classroom, right? So there's something about the way in which you know, with
It was
a
just your
human,
eyes
with a
all
human
wide.
individual,
I
and
didn't
the way
know that I
that
had a
human
meeting for
individuals
class,
project.
and so I kept getting notifications, and I was like, "Fuck."
Dr. Condell's schedule is completely booked, but I have somebody calling saying that her son had surgery and
Well,
she
here
had
we
taken
go.
her
So
to
here,
be removed, and they told her to follow up with Dr. Condell specifically, but I can't make her wait an entire month. Can I throw them in? Yeah.
can everyone hear me?
There's two
Yeah.
double bookings on there, so I'm going to do it the first one.
Yeah, that's
and tell
fine.
her that's
Get
the only
others
person
to
available.
mute
That's
their
totally fine.
line.
Yeah, I don't know who's talking.
It's showing that. I mean, where it says participants, it's showing whom is talking. If like they could mute because
So
it's
are you Roxanne?
yeah.
Okay. So Marissa muted herself,
Okay.
and then Roxanne. Okay. Everyone else there.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Curtis is back.
Yeah, I'm here too.
Okay. All right, here we go. So like fantasy space is really key to understand because fantasy space, although they're fantasies, they do project real things, even though they're rooted in various fantasies. So Zizek is trying to complicate how we understand reality. So reality is much more complex than we think because reality includes our desires, our wishes, our hopes, dreams, and all these things get projected onto reality. So there's reality that science studies, you know, elementary particles and wave functions if you're in the so he's entering his analysis of the Black House by getting to the main issue, which is fantasy space. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Sort of.
Yeah. Well, let me just keep reading, and then we'll return to these key terms: fantasy space, etc. So he's the first paragraph. Zizek is summarizing this short story. And then here we go. A certain malediction hangs over this mysterious Black House. There is a tacit agreement among the men that one is not allowed to approach it. Entering it is supposed to involve mortal danger. It is rumored that the house is haunted, that it is inhabited by a lonely lunatic who kills all intruders. Do you see the fantasy operating here? No one has been to the house, but they've relied on various local myths and fantasies, and it's integrated. It's been embedded into their daily lives. So this house is haunted, etc. But at the same time, the Black House is a place that links all their adolescent memories, the place of their first transgressions, above all those related to sexual experience. The men endlessly retell stories of how years ago they had their first sexual encounter in the house with the prettiest girl in the town, how they had their first cigarette in it. But all of that is a lie. The hero of the story is a young engineer who just moved into town. After listening to all the myths about the Black House, he announces to the company his intention of exploring this mysterious house the next evening. The men present react to this announcement with silent but nonetheless intense disapproval. The next evening, the young engineer visits the house, expecting something terrible or at least something unexpected to happen to him. With tense anticipation, he approaches the dark old ruin. Old ruin's key because it connects back to Dylan Trigg's essay. Climbs the creaking staircase, examines all the rooms, but finds nothing except a few decaying mats on the floor. So do you see what's happening here? for those who are following along?
From what you just read, I have the impression that he's trying to paint this picture of this house.
Yep.
But then I got lost after that.
So yeah, so you have this contrast. You have the house that is being constructed by the folks in the saloon, right?
Okay.
So you have that house, the house being constructed by various fantasies, and then you have this engineer who went to the house who was like, "Yo, this is nothing. This isn't a big deal." It's the house that the fantasies from the people in the saloon. It's a major contrast. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so that's key. So where Zizek is using Patricia Highsmith to really delve into the complexities of reality when human beings, when you have to include the fantasies, wishes, hopes, desires, lies for that matter of human beings, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's, on the one hand, there's the black house as it exists in the fantasy space, right? Then there's the black house as it exists, as it really is, which is what the engineer experienced. So you have this contrast between like mathematics, science, the engineer, and then you have, the house as it exists in various fantasies, hearsays, myths, etc. Right?
So,
Yeah, go for it.
sorry. So, for example, a black house can represent, let's say, a fairy tale,
Yeah,
and the
absolutely.
engineer would represent the truth behind that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
What makes Zizek unique, though, is the only way to get to the truth is through the lie.
Okay.
So you cannot, for Zizek, the way to truth includes all fantasies, desires, hopes, dreams, wishes, veiled dreams, delusions, illusions. Like all these things cannot be cleanly separated from our access to truth. Does that make sense?
Yes, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Okay. And that's it's key. The major myth is that we can have access to truth without any obstructions, right? That is the major myth. What Zizek is trying to do is no. I mean, at the one hand, fantasy space, we see the truth of the black house through fantasy space in the same way that we see the truth of the black house when it's not in fantasy space. But to think that we can get to the ultimate truth of the black house by like cleaning it up, by like getting rid of all our fantasies, that is the myth. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, does someone want to put that in your own words? Because it's key.
Can I say something, Nathan?
Yeah, please.
Okay, well, so I like taking you for the English. What was it, 45? But in the Fuente thing, and I
Oh,
remember,
hey.
yeah, I remember we used to do a lot of Zizek, and
Yeah.
for me, I've always liked him more as one of the authors that you use
Yeah.
because he's tricky. He
Yeah.
says something, but he means something else by it, and you just have to kind of sit and see things from a different point of view because he's gonna say something that throws you off. Because for me, I could read it like 100 times and still not understand what he's saying
Yeah.
because he doesn't say it like it is. He kind of talks in like what's a good way to say it? Like mm, when he's telling you something, he wants you to picture it from a certain point of view, and he gets into depth about it where you could actually visual it and see it for yourself. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
it's like
that,
kind of a tricky way of like his writing to understand it.
no, I think that's great. That's a great point. So in just in the section that we're reading and thinking about, Zizek himself is performing anamorphosis.
Right.
So the only way to see reality or the reality of this text that we're reading is to see it at an angle, at a awry, right? You can never look at something straight on to see for what it really is.
Right.
You always have to shift your perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And he's very serious about that, and he's performing this in this text. So that's very good. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So you can, in your notes, you just want to, like, because Zizek is discussing anamorphosis, he's going to perform it. So, yeah, and you'll see how it develops. So, just to kind of summarize our journey thus far. So we have two contrasts happening here. We have a black house that is being constructed by myths, by fairy tales, and then we have the black house being constructed through the lens of the engineer, who is like, the black house is this stupid, boring house. Who cares, right? So let's see what happens. Can we see here? So I'm going to start reading. Here. Can we see that on my screen?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So the engineer is like, oh, I got to tell these people because they're duped. I mean, they're being misled by delusions and lies. So he's eager to return. So here we go. He immediately returns to the saloon and triumphantly declares to the gathered men that their black house is just an old, filthy ruin, that there is nothing mysterious or fascinating about it. The men are horrified when the engineer begins to leave. One of them wildly attacks him. The engineer unfortunately falls to the ground and soon afterward dies. Right? Why? And then so Zizek is now going to perform his analysis. Right? So why were the men so horrified by the action of the newcomer? We can grasp their resentment by remarking the difference between reality and the other scene of the fantasy space. The black house was forbidden to the men because it functioned as an empty space where they could project their nostalgic desires, their distorted memories. By publicly stating that the black house was nothing but an old ruin, the young intruder reduced their fantasy space to everyday common reality. So notice the contrast here. He annulled the difference between reality and fantasy space, depriving the men of the place in which they were able to articulate their desires. So what do we think now? So I have Brittany, Christina, Curtis.
I'm here, Nathan.
All right. So any thoughts? Any thoughts on what this means?
Basically took away like fake memories from them, right?
Yeah.
By exposing that.
Yeah, that's great. That's brilliant, actually. Absolutely. That the engineer, the worst thing you can do from, psychoanalysis is very concerned about the implications of human beings having to give up various fantasies. That by having to give up various fantasies, you can die, whether it's a literal death or a symbolic death. So psychoanalysis takes, fantasy very seriously because there's broader implications. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
So while pointing out to someone, as the engineer does, that like everyone here is under this mass delusion and kind of enslaved to false memory syndrome. And the thing is they know that, but they need this black house to operate in a certain way in order for their life to have any meaning. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the engineer disturbed that space. The thing is the men in the saloon know very well that they're enslaved to false memory, but their lives have meaning nonetheless, even though they know they are lying or relying on various myths.
Hello.
Hi.
I just joined a few minutes ago. It's Liliana.
Hi.
But when I was reading this, I didn't think that they were technically false memories, but they can
Right.
also be flashbulb memories where they did have some sort of attachment there, but
Absolutely.
they're just not remembering or over exaggerating the exact memory. So I didn't think that they were completely false, but they could be flashbulb memories.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like
Absolutely.
half truths?
Half truth. Absolutely.
Yeah, I believe flashbulb memories are when it's been years and you remember only particular things, but you don't remember the entire event itself.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that.
I get it.
Yeah, but the problem is what makes the reaction or the way that Zizek wants the reader to appreciate his analysis is we tend to, or at least psychoanalysis, what makes it theoretically important is that there are times where human beings know that they are working with half truths. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we're not always on
Yes.
we're not always on autopilot. Sometimes we know very well that this is all a fantasy. And sometimes we're very conscious of it. Sometimes we're not, but sometimes we are.
Yeah.
And and that's an important distinction to make. So sometimes we tend to think that people who have delusions, did you say light bulb memories?
Flashbulb memories.
Flashbulb, that's so perfect. That, yeah, as though, so whenever we have these things, there's moments in our lives where we know I'm having a flashbulb memory. Yeah, so we're not always on autopilot or unconscious. Sometimes we are, but yeah.
Because I was thinking about it, if they wouldn't be completely false because they have some sort of attachment to the black house.
Absolutely.
They have some sort of physical attachment that they've been there. They do have some sort of memory of being there, but it might not be the memory that they are thinking of or recalling of. So I know that they possibly have physically been there.
Yes, I love that. What's your name?
Liliana Ortiz.
Yeah, Liliana, yes. So that's great for everyone. So what Liliana is advancing here is there's the actual experience of the black house itself, and then there's the memory whether it's a flashbulb memory, etc. So there's the actual experience, and then when the experience gets threaded through fantasies, desires of the human being, he begins thinking about the black house. So that creates a contrast between the actual experience itself through the five senses and then one's remembering it. And the black house in memory, when it's clothed in like fantasies, etc., is not identical to the actual experience itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right on. And oftentimes, the actual experience through the five senses it's boring. It's kind of a letdown, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, I mean, it's awful, and so that's where fantasy and flashbulb memories are really profound, because they tend to make the experience much more dope at times than just like the
Yeah.
the ridiculous everyday experience of something. Does that all make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Anything that's going through your mind? Any connections to other things? Any movies? Any other any things that you've read or seen recently?
Not
Well,
that I think of.
well, it's a classic horror movie
Right.
scene. I mean, scary stories to tell in the dark just did the exact house that you would think of, or like American Horror Story. But with also the whole fantasy
Yes.
and not, define the difference between reality and real.
Right.
A lot of someone said it in the discussion board, but I was thinking it as I read it, is that a lot of it could be disproven because people would think that they're schizophrenic.
Yes.
Or have some sort of mental disorder.
Yes.
I don't remember when it says Zizek.
Yes. Zizek. Yes.
Zizek. When he wrote this, what was the time period he wrote this in?
He was writing this in the kind of the fall of the Berlin Wall, so late 80s, early 90s.
Okay. Because even during this time is when outpatient therapy had just become a thing because mental institutions were considered insufficient and ineffective. So I was thinking, maybe a lot more people at this time were disproving his theory because people were in mental institutions for the wrong things even during that time. It was getting better, but this was during, I believe, the institutional development.
Yes.
And people were disproving this theory because my theory is that they were believing that everyone who is schizophrenic who thinks that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and that's key. Liliana, right? Is that you?
Yes.
Yeah. So for everyone else who's listening, what Liliana is doing is kind of historicizing the development of really like a mature field in psychology and psychiatry, etc. So once not an expert, and I'm kind of an expert in psychoanalysis, which is in a battle. It's an endless battle between the empirical sciences, which psychiatry and psychology kind of falls under, and then psychoanalysis.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have the archive of mental diseases, mental illnesses, and that becomes like legitimate science. And then that is used to attack psychoanalysis, which is interested in language and how language has invaded the human body, and how that's affected how a particular human being understands themselves and their relationship to reality. But as I indicated earlier, psychoanalysis focuses on that one's relationship to reality is far more complex than like making a simple proposition like this is a chair. But yeah, what Liliana is doing nicely is kind of historicizing the development of certain of the empirical sciences.
It's because I'm a psych major.
Yeah, it's clear. It's wonderful. You've had really great. So that's very useful. It's a useful tool to use when enriching your analysis of any text by Zizek, because his go-to theoretical lens will always be psychoanalysis, and so there will always be opportunities for you to kind of historicize or to contextualize your major with psychoanalysis. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, that's why I liked this particular subject, and I liked Trigg's essay.
Yes.
Because it was easier for me to read, especially since I've taken many of psych classes. I think for Zizek,
Yes.
I think this would be an interesting piece because I'm currently in abnormal psychology right now.
Yes.
I think this would be a very interesting piece in abnormal psychology.
Yes.
And it can, probably help with the diathesis and stressor model, which could, that fantasy shape being broken could be a stressor, and that could cause them to, come as a mental illness.
That's great. That's absolutely correct. And yeah, there's broad implications to giving up fantasies. And yeah, I can't word it any better, but hopefully everyone else is listening and taking notes. So what's being introduced here is we're reading Zizek, we're trying to make sense of it, but we're also bringing our academic backgrounds, our cultural backgrounds, our linguistic backgrounds to the reading and trying to make sense of it. So what Liliana is introducing us to is, what does it mean to read Zizek as a psych major? What does that look like, and how does what does anamorphosis look like from the point of view of psychology, abnormal psychology, etc.? So that's useful for everyone. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can approach this through, if you're a business major, through most majors of EVC, you can approach like most of the readings in this class. So you would be interested in like, oh, so it's talking about a saloon. What was the economic conditions of this town? Was there a middle class? You know what I'm saying? Like all these things.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, you want me to go on to Youngmin Kim or?
Yes, I just have to say I'm hearing a lot of tapping. I don't know where it's coming from.
Okay.
I hear it as well.
Me too.
Me too.
Okay. So whoever is tapping, stop it. But I don't. Okay. That's all I could do. I can't
Sounds like someone is trying to click their microphone in or something.
Yeah.
Or it's like if they're on their phone, they're texting, or I have no idea.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like someone texting on phone.
It's annoying.
Yeah, it is. But I'll let you say that. I have to pretend that everything is wonderful.
Yeah,
But
everything is great.
Everything is great. But you know what I'm saying. Okay, so Youngmin Kim, can we all see this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Do you want me to keep reading, or does someone want to read it?
You, please.
I can't see any of the words of that. They're all so jam together.
Okay. I'll just read it. So here's Youngmin Kim. This is at the level of like just paying attention to different genres. So this is like a personal email Youngmin Kim wrote to me. And Kim's so it's way different than Zizek. This is an email, so things are going to be radically underdeveloped, etc. Not to say that Zizek's text is perfect. It totally isn't, but there's a distinction to be made between what one accomplishes in an email and then what one accomplishes in a book. Can we all agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay, different purposes, different audiences, and this is okay. Good. That's cool that we understand that. All right, so here's Youngmin Kim. So anamorphosis reminds us that what you see has a great deal to do with where you are looking from. We tend to think that seeing is a direct perception of reality. Is this clear to everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so he's right now, like in this sentence here, Kim is opening the question about, the relationship between seeing and reality, and he calls it into question by we assume that what we see is what we see. So he's opening up that question, like, do we really see what we see? That type of thing. However, we are constantly interpreting and giving structure to the raw visual materials from our eyes. As far as we see an object, we give it a stable and rectangular form because we prefer an ordered world, regular patterns, and familiar forms. We see what we want or expect to see. We never see the whole of any solid object at any given moment. Is this making sense to us?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can
Yes.
does someone want to offer, just kind of like talk it out? Like, how do you understand this so far? Curtis, just go.
So basically, we want to see the world as it is, but there's more to the world than what we think we see.
Absolutely.
I want to chime in. When I read this, I was in a group one time and this gentleman had brought in a mirror that kind of, when you looked at yourself in the mirror, what you see in an actual like flat mirror is not what you saw in this mirror of yourself. So when I read this, I was like, that's all I could think about the whole time was, this is not what I see when I look into a regular mirror.
Wow,
like I'm
that's
not
great.
actually, my eyes are probably a little bit crooked or my ears are probably not level. So
Yeah, totally.
that's what I was thinking about the whole time that I was reading this.
Absolutely.
It's funny because you see yourself in a mirror and then you take a picture or you see a picture of yourself. You're like, where did that come from?
Absolutely.
Right,
You're like, when is that there?
Right.
Absolutely. Good. And so you kind of see, like, we've been conditioned to believe that reality is, and for all intents and purposes, reality is ordered, but there's nothing. In other words, like, reality is not like going to like Wenco or Stater Brothers and seeing like properly curated shelves. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
So we bought. Yeah, go for it.
Oh, when I was reading this, it's also weird because it's like we can't see the color pink. Right. The color pinks don't have like magenta, they don't have a wavelength
right.
to them, so our mind is making up this pink color.
Right.
It was crazy to me because when I learned about that, it was just a video on color theory.
Yeah,
it was
absolutely.
really interesting because I forgot that when in one of my classes that you see things in waves.
Yes.
So like again, the color pink doesn't exist necessarily. It's just a color that our brain is making up.
Absolutely.
So when I found that, I was like, oh wow, that's crazy. I had no idea.
Yes.
Would never have guessed. But reading this, I was like, that makes a lot more sense as to why our brain is making up something to replace a color that doesn't exist to us.
Yeah, and it's kind of helped our survival. I mean, when we saw prey, we saw it like, oh, that's a lion coming towards me. And even though it could have been like a bush in certain light, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
No, that's a lion, and I'm gonna run. So yeah. And then with the history of just, rationality in general, with the, itemizing, coming up with like lists and like periodic tables, we've been conditioned to believe that reality is just so nicely ordered, like a periodic table, or the commodities and foods at like Stater Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And they are. And Stater Brothers is incredibly organized, but what Anamorphosis teaches us is not to identify what you see at Stater Brothers as like a way to understand the complexity of reality. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So here we go. Rather, we accept at a single glance that what we see is what it is. Therefore, for an anamorphosis, the viewer must seek out the drastic change of viewpoint to make sense of what has been viewed. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, so since Youngmin Kim is opening the question that what we see is not exactly what it is, even though it looks the way it is, it's not exactly the way it is. Anamorphosis is like almost like it's an ethical obligation to always not be seduced by it is what it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a tautology, and it's very seductive, very powerful. Professional athletes are they promote this ideology. It is what it is. No, it's much more complex, but it's just easier to say that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right on. So anamorphosis, now we have to get through our day, so our day consists of sometimes doing our jobs and doing them well, but in moments where we begin to truly think and reflect, anamorphosis is kind of that ethical obligation to not be so seduced by the it is what it is. But when you're at your work, do your job. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't like, okay. But it's when you are in moments where you are truly thinking, then anamorphosis is kind of a useful ethical device to go like, did I really see that, etc. So here we go. The implication of this anamorphosis seems broader and metaphorical. When what appears to be merely a potential object of the subject's attentive gaze is suddenly revealed to be itself a subject, a threatening subject who takes the first subject as its own object. And Trigg was talking about this with Freud, where the Acropolis began looking at Freud instead of Freud looking at the Acropolis. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The ruin, the object, the house, whatever, is looking at you, and you feel objectified, whereas the object becomes the subject, turning you into an object. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Also known as anxiety. Anxiety from a psychoanalytic perspective is when the object is too close to you, and by being too close to you, it's converting you into an object. So it's almost as if you're seeing yourself through the perspective of objective reality, and it's too much.
Mm-hmm.
Someone go. Yes.
I've been to like many abandoned places.
Yes.
And I liked how Triggs touched up on the whole ghostly experience.
Absolutely.
Because it makes sense that like the whole object is watching you. But I've always, like, there's stories that say, oh, the house has a personality. Like Edgar Allan Poe, he says the house has a personality of its own.
Absolutely.
And I was wondering if we're reading if masks lead to anamorphosis.
Yes.
Okay, because then Edgar Allan Poe's a huge advocate for that.
Yes.
But it's creepy because it's like he said you make up people to take the place of the object.
Absolutely. Yeah. Did everyone hear that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is one of the most brilliant Zoom sessions I've ever had. This is so great. Yeah, I'm really impressed. Yeah. So a lot of things are happening with making these connections, and when you make connections like masks, Edgar Allan Poe, you yourself visiting abandoned buildings and feeling like, is something looking at me? That is anamorphosis.
Okay.
Yeah. And
that's
then,
something you won't understand unless you experience it yourself. Like, it's easy to read, but to experience it yourself, it's like you feel so little.
Yes, you absolutely do. Yes. I can't really add to that. I'm just thinking about my time in Europe. I just felt like these ruins from the 2nd century are just looking at me and almost like making fun of me in a way. Like, who am I? But and then we think that we know something by giving it a name, like the Notre Dame Cathedral. Anyways, right on. So the feeling, there's a connection between Youngman Kim's understanding of anamorphosis and then like Trigg, like later on in his essay where he talks about ghostly materiality, where as Liliana just talked about, when you go to abandoned sites or ruins, they have this ghostly materiality that kind of flashes. It shows itself, but when it shows itself, the feeling is that like, this cannot be real. This is like otherworldly. This is alien. And that experience. So ghostly materiality and Trigg, and then Youngman Kim's understanding of anamorphosis, they're kind of referring to the same thing. When objective reality turns into a subject and then turns you, the human subject, into an object, and you're that kind of anxious feeling that comes from that. All right, so let's keep going here. Does someone want to say anything?
Could you say that again, what you just said?
Yeah, so I'll probably put it in other words. So Trigg's ghostly materiality, which is a description of an experience where objective reality, objective meaning abandoned sites, ruins, old, broken down homes, they then become a subject who then turns you, who's walking in that space, into an object. And that experience is anamorphosis, full stop. When you yourself feel that you are being objectified by an object, the object is looking at you. and that feeling. And Trig will describe it as anxiety, and I think that's correct.
Doesn't necessarily have to be like a ruin or abandoned, or can it be like places like the Winchester Mansion where she has stairs coming out of her walls and doors to nothing?
Absolutely.
So, because that place too, I mean, it's a historical location now, but it's not abandoned necessarily. Right. It's been preserved since the earthquake in San Jose.
Absolutely.
So
that's a perfect example. Any time if anyone has walked down downtown LA, and just just dealing with the various streets, the architecture, etc., and then you feeling like disorientated, uncertain where you're at, that too is what Trig and what Zizek and Youngman Kim are talking about. It's you're experiencing anamorphosis.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll just finish with this. Thus, the person tends to forget that he is in the world as a potential object. Does that make sense? We tend to think that like we're kind of some third person neutral, like we're just observing reality instead of no. This is we're implicated in this. We're not somehow set apart from reality that we can come in and exit as we please. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Even though that's a very useful fantasy to believe that, oh, I'm just going to kind of observe reality today, you know. No. This forgetting is an illusion. Thus, reality is an illusion, and the true reality is the reality of the real. I'll try to, in psychoanalysis, like reality is a necessary illusion because it protects us from the real with a capital R. The real is something that absolutely disturbs everything in your life. That let me see if I can give this example, if this example will land. Say you've driven on a road thousands of times, you can pretty much drive this road on autopilot. You can text on this road and not really worry about anything because you can pretty much predict what's going on until something happens, right?
Yeah.
That is the real. And then when something happens, your entire relationship to this road is profoundly altered forever and ever. That is the real.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right on. So the real punches a hole in fantasy. So the real is responsible for putting cracks into reality. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. And then Youngman Kim finishes, we live in the world, and the world is out there to exceed our gaze in the form of the blot or stain. So before we go, any thoughts, any comments?
No, not really.
Mm-mm.
Did this help?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes, it helps a lot.
I have a question. Do you think that they're also talking about that this is our brain protecting ourselves from things like PTSD? So
Yes.
So like instead of having something very traumatic happening, the littlest thing can happen and you'll remember it forever. So
Yeah,
you think it's our brain protecting us from harm, basically?
Yes. It's our brain protecting from itself. The brain is trying to protect us from itself.
Okay.
Which absolutely. So you can bring in neuroscience here, trauma studies for sure. But yeah. Cool, everyone. So we'll. Do you like this format?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I like
this is
it.
cool.
Okay, cool. So we'll probably do this. I'll get like my schedule intact for like doing these virtual things online, and then it will probably be Mondays and Wednesdays if that's cool.
Okay.
That's fine with me.
And then I'll do what I can to record these things,
Okay.
and then I'll post them. But hopefully you feel confident moving forward. So is it cool if we adjourn?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right on.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Yes,
you're
thank
welcome.
you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye, you too.